Oh, sorry. I didn't see you there. I was just waiting for my driver to bring the car around so we could take a trip to Harrods. Maybe pick up one or two things from there and go, maybe go into Selfridges and. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel this week. My name is Priscilla. I'm a Nigerian women's wear designer based in the UK. And for this video, I'm going to be trying something I have not done before, which is a kaftan or abaya or bubu gown, really loose fitting on the body. And I decided to use this Adire silk fabric that I got off Etsy. I'm going to be linking all the materials in the description box down below. I worked from my measurements. I made the patterns first before cutting and sewing the piece, and let me just say, I think I need to make like 20 more of this. It is so comfortable. Now I understand why my mother wore this thing all the time, because I was like, why does this woman only wear a boo gown around the house? But now I understand why. The comfort level, and it hides everything, like the belly, the sides. It just like sits so nicely on the body. If you do enjoy this video, make sure to share it with your sewing community. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe and join the KDVibes fam if you haven't already. And let's get into this tutorial, because this piece is giving me rich auntie vibes. There are so many beautiful variations of kaftan and abaya dresses, and what I love about them is how comfortable they are on the body, and you can have fun with the cut, with the colors, and the choice of prints that you can use to make yours. To achieve the best outcome, I recommend working with your measurements or that of your clients, and these are the measurements that you're going to be needing. I have a separate video where I shared how to take your own measurement using a tape measure, so check that out if you haven't seen it already. Now I'm starting off with making the pattern of the dress, and I'm going in here to draw a long vertical line which is going to become my center front line for the front of the dress. Next up, I'm going to the top edge and drawing a short horizontal line which is going to become my shoulder line, and I'm marking 4 inches along that shoulder line. Then I'm going to mark 6.5 inches vertically down and connect them together to create my neckline. If you want a wider neckline, you have the freedom to mark 5 or 6 inches along the shoulder line before connecting it down to your neckline. Next up, I'm marking 4 inches slightly downwards, and this is the width of my shoulder, and then I'm just drawing down this point like so. And then my sleeve length is roughly 18 inches because I'm going to be adding a cuff to the sleeve hem. I'm just extending that line like so, and then the sleeve width along the hem is 5 inches, so it slightly tapers in and it goes from the shoulder to the sleeve hem. Once you've drawn that in place, I'm just going to draw a slightly short line so we have a straighter edge along this point before curving it into the side seam. Now my full dress length was about 49 inches. You can make yours longer or shorter. I then went in to square across my dress hemline, and I'm marking my dress width. Here I initially marked 14 inches, but I ended up going back in to reduce it to about 12 inches because I wanted it to be narrower along the hem. The next thing I'm doing in here is to draw in the side seam by hand, and this is the point where the fullness of the dress can be really added. You can make that curve a lot more rounded or a lot more tapered to your body. However, I recommend going back to check along the bust, the waist and the hip area to be sure that the dress is wide enough to be comfy and loose around your body. Now I'm just going back in to make my neckline even deeper, because why not? I made it deep to about 8.5 inches, so it covers my bust but it just shows a bit more of my neck. And then the next thing I did was I narrowed in the hemline to 12 inches from my 14 inch because I just wanted it to taper in as it goes towards the bottom of the dress, so it made like an inverted A shape on the body. So I'm just going in here to check that the waist, the bust and the hip are comfortable for my body measurement before going in to plan my front facing. So my facing is about 2 inches wide, and I'm just drawing it along the neckline like so, straight or slanted at this point, and then I opted for a more curved edge along this bottom of the facing like so. I went in to add a notch, so I know that's the point that my facing should connect to the neckline of my dress along the front. I went ahead to trace off the facing pattern on another piece of paper, added my notch, grain line, as well as my annotations. Now I went in to add a 1 centimeter seam allowance around my front dress pattern and a 2 centimeter hem allowance, and this is what the front plan is looking like. Relatively easy, relatively straightforward, and I'm just going in to cut out my front dress, which I'm going to be using to plan my back. So these are my front pattern pieces, the main kaftan piece, and then the facing, which will help me finish up the neckline really nicely. So once you're happy with that, I just taped down the front piece and I got a large piece of pattern paper and I'm tracing off the front for my back. Now the difference between the front and the back is essentially just the neckline. The neckline is a lot higher. I would say the neckline was about 1 inch down the shoulder line, so it creates enough room for your hair to pass through, but it covers up your back. You have the freedom to change the neckline if you want to. You can go for a deep V at the back as well, or something squarish, whatever you are comfortable with. And I'm just going in here to trace off the other parts of my back piece before going in to plan my back facing. Now your front and your back facings have to be the same width along the shoulder for them to connect, and I just opted for the same 2-inch width along the back, and I'm just connecting it along this side like so up to the shoulder point. Once you're happy with that back facing, you can go in and add a notch along the neckline, so that helps you when you're sewing the piece together. And then I'm going to get another piece of paper and trace off my back facing like we did for the front, because it's a separate pattern piece. This you will be cutting on a fold like you will be doing it for the front as well. So I went in to cut out my back dress pattern pieces, and these are all of the patterns I'm going to be using. Now you can actually cut this design straight onto your fabric, but because I wanted to add a facing and I wanted to be sure of the fit, the hems, and all those details, I made my patterns. But if you're someone who is comfortable just drawing straight onto fabric, you can skip creating the pattern pieces if you want to. Now I just went ahead to pin down my pattern pieces onto my fabric, and the good thing about the pattern is that you can play around with the placement of any designs or prints that your fabric has, so you can really center it at the middle of your kaftan like mine has here. So I went ahead to cut my front and back dress pieces as well as the facings, which I fused on the wrong side to give them a bit more stability around the neckline of the dress. For the cuff, I went ahead to cut 2 rectangles that measured 10 inches width and 7.5 inches in height. These I'm going to be folding and then attaching to the sleeve of the dress. But the first thing I'm going to be sewing is my facings. I'm going to be joining the back and the front facing along the shoulders like so. I'm first off going to be sewing with a normal straight stitch, and after doing that, going to my overlocker to overlock those seams, and then overlock around the entire bottom of the front to the back. So that just helps to hold the interlining that I used, the interfacing that I used, and then it keeps the facing nice and neat on the inside. So I went ahead to place right sides together of my front and my back dress, and I just pinned everything in place, and I've pinned the shoulders as well as the side seams together, and I'm going to be sewing up the entire side seam of the left and the right hand side of the dress to create one piece. Now I'm just going in and sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, sewing my sides and my shoulder seams, and then I'm going to take this piece to my overlocker and overlock the seams on the inside. You have the option of using a zigzag stitch on your seam allowance, using bias binding if you wanted to, or you could even use a French seam, which would just allow you to not have to overlock if you don't have an overlocker. So the next thing I'm doing in here is I am sewing the facing to the neckline of the dress. I've just pinned it first, shoulder to shoulder, center back to center back, and center front to center front, and I'm going to be sewing them together in such a way that the facing helps me to finish the neckline of the dress. Now after sewing it normally like this on the 1 centimeter seam allowance, I'm going to take this piece back to my machine, and I'm going to be doing a very narrow edge stitch that is going to keep the facing on the inside of the garment. Now the way this works is you essentially would open up the garment like so. You pull the seam allowance towards the facing, and then you're going to be stitching on the inside of the garment, stitching really close to the edge. I'll say about 0.2 to 0.4 centimeter seam allowance, and then just stitch down the facing to the seam allowance all the way across. This is a tricky thing because it's so fiddly and one foul swoop and the stitch just looks messy, so take your time doing this. And this is what the neckline looks like. Now the next thing I did was I just hand tacked the shoulder point of the facing to that seam on the shoulder, and that helps to keep the facing folded inside of the garment along the neckline. So once we're done working with the neckline, we know we can go ahead to add the cuffs to the sleeve of the dress. And I'm going to be putting right sides together of this first cuff like so, and I'm going to be sewing it closed like this to create a tunnel. And then this tunnel I'm going to turn inside out and press it nice and flat so it looks like this. Now you have the option of fusing the cuff piece if you want it to be a bit more structured, but I was fine having mine like this. So I'm just going in here to attach the cuff to the sleeve hem of the piece like so. I'm going to be taking this to my machine, and I'm going to be first off sewing it all the way across. Take your time sewing this because it's a very like small circular piece that can be very like tricky to sew, but after doing that, you know, you can go back in with your overlocker or any means that you want to finish your seams. Now the last thing you need to do is to go in and fold and sew your dress hemline to finish it off. And then I went back to give my garment a press, and this is what the final piece looks like. Now this garment is one thing I remember from my childhood that my mom would wear all the time. It is so comfortable, and I love the fact that the diamond shape is smack on the front and smack on the back, so it just makes it so satisfying to look at. Now you compare this with a belt around the waist if you want more definition, but honestly I'll be wearing this around the house as a great lounge laying around the house piece, or on holiday if I wanted something nice and comfortable, or around doing grocery shopping or running errands. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you did, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you're going to be recreating this, don't forget to tag me on Instagram at KimDaveDesigns. I'm going to be tagging all the materials I use in the video description as well. And until my next video, have a good morning, afternoon and evening wherever you are. Bye.